Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you wonderful people. I am once again back talking about the latest edition of Warcry, and I am once again back talking about warbands. The last time we took a step back in time and looked at one of the older warbands, the Scions of Flame, but today we are looking forward. Today we are looking at one of the latest sets to come out thanks to the recent release of Bloodhunt. We are of course looking at the Cornish werewolves, the CLAWS of Karanak. But before we get into all that, please remember to drop a like, leave a comment and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps the channel fight the demonic YouTube algorithmic demon, and my god is it a hefty demon. Your support warms the heart of this old wargamer and lets me know that you want to see more of this kind of content. I do try to improve every video, and your feedback does nothing but help with that process. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. As per usual, we start with story time, so grab a blanket and let's get straight into it. Few warriors can match the sheer ferocity of the CLAWS of Karanak. Worshippers of the demonic hounds that hunt down those who earn the blood god's ire, they revel in the extermination of cravens and are utterly relentless when running down their chosen prey. And that comes directly from the Predator and Prey book that comes with Bloodhunt. And I think that perfectly sums up what we're looking at here. But with story time out of the way, and we're all feeling warm and cozy, let's get into some stats and let's see what makes these guys tick. And starting things out, we're going to start with the pack load. This guy is quite the beast. He's expensive, but his stats more than make up for that. This guy is movement 5, toughness 4, and has 20 wounds. This makes him very fast and decently tough. Toughness 4 is always a solid line, and 20 wounds is the average for this kind of points level. Right off the bat, he looks like an aggressive model who can get around. And then this is complemented with his frankly wonderful assault profile. Range 1, attacks 5, strength 5, and 2/5 damage. Okay, so like sure, that range 1 is going to hurt, but with movement 5, it doesn't hurt anywhere near as much as you'd think. Having 5 attacks at strength 5 is outstanding. This guy is a natural crit fisher, and with minimal dice investments such as like onslaught, this guy will hit very hard. We're talking about every swing on average killing a standard chaff. This makes him hard to bog down and very effective at getting things done. I love this guy, but just be aware he will go down fast if people focus him down. A few lucky crits and he will be out for the count. Simple as that. Following on from that, it is the Hound of Wrath, who is the most interesting looking model of this set, and in my opinion one of the more interesting in terms of mechanics as well. He's very expensive at 190 points, but this is mostly due to how fast this thing is. He has a movement 7 base, which is very nice. Toughness 4 and 18 wounds also makes this guy about as tough as your pack load, making it the second toughest thing in your entire warband. That speed is put to very good use as well. Range 1, attacks 5, strength 4, 2/4 damage. And again, range 1 here is fine when you consider the movement of this guy. Attack 5 is beautiful, strength 4 is okay, and 2/4 damage is a little bit on the low end. But the Hound of Wrath, like I said, is interesting. It's very fast, very expensive, and very damaging against very specific things. This guy is basically a chaff killer. With a little bit of support, it can boost its attacks from 5 to 7, more than that in a bit, and this really pushes that high volume, decent quality attack profile that the Hound is rocking. In testing, the Hound felt like it was a little bit of a wet noodle depending on the opponent. Anything with toughness 5 and above will not really be threatened by this guy, and even rocking attack buffs to crit fish even harder, models of comparable cost and frankly lower will tank hits and then smack back far harder. The Hound of Wrath should use its speed to hit where it hits best, and if it can't, then perhaps use it to run circles and hit objectives. Do be aware, this guy has the Beast rune mark, which means it can't pick up treasure. Now we move on to the more basic units in the warband, and these are the Brutalizers. And these are your front liners and come in two variants, and those are the Double Shredding Blade, or one guy who has one blade and a rather vicious looking meat hook. Defensively, they are identical, although the meat hook is 5 points cheaper. They are movement 5, toughness 3, 15 wounds, and this is a very interesting stat line. They have great movement and excellent wounds. However, for their cost, their toughness is abysmal. Toughness 3 means everything stronger than chaff is going to cut into your thick wound pool. This makes them essentially glass cannons, in theory, more so than even the Packlord and the Hound of Wrath. Offensively, they are very similar. Double Blades nets you range 1, attack 4, strength 4, 2/4 damage, whilst the hook comes in with range 1, attacks 3, strength 4, and 2/5 damage, and a key rune mark we will go over when we hit up those abilities. And these are fine, both are fine, but again, they are a little bit overpriced for what their stats bring. These are about as good as, let's say, a Bestigor, but are rocking a 20-point premium and have worse stats in several cases. These are glass cannons, they will do work, but they will drop like a log when focused by anything of a similar points value, and will struggle even against chaff when they start taking enough hits. Their movement is their main advantage, so use this to pressure key areas against slower units. Do be aware as well that these guys are painfully susceptible to being shot at by even the most basic of weapons. And then finally we move on to our chaff, and these are the Bloodwhelps. These guys are also rocking two profiles, and this is the Spear and the Flail variant. Defensively, however, they are the same. Both are 90 points and come with movement 5, toughness 3, and 12 wounds. That is a very decent profile, with the wounds 12 in particular being very nice for chaff. But again, you can't ignore that toughness 3. It hurts, and these guys are not all that cheap. That being said, they're actually pretty good on the offensive. The Spear variant is range 2, attacks 2, strength 4, 2/4 damage, which is not all that bad. The damage in particular is very tasty, although the attacks stat leaves a lot to be desired. That can be slightly remedied when we look at abilities, however, so just do bear that in mind for now. The Flail, on the other hand, is range 3, attacks 3, strength 4, 1/3 damage. This is a decrease in damage stats, but you do get a lovely boost to range and attacks. This makes the Flail far more defensive, and frankly, once you math hammer it out, there's actually a negligible difference in damage output in most cases, and again, the Flail has range and is more defensive. When I say defensive, I mean that most warbands don't actually have access to range 3 weapons, so you are in most cases forcing enemies to burn actions to move to attack you, functionally halving their damage output for that turn. This helps mitigate that toughness 3 massively. Overall, the stats on the CLAWS of Karanak are all interesting. These guys are a fast faction, has a lot of attack potential, but not a lot of quality. Their quality of attacks is quite low. They really do have just a lot of attacks under their belt, and this is made even more apparent in the ability section, which is next, okay? These are glass cannons who rely on weight of attacks, giving them a very nice feel on the tabletop, but one with clear weaknesses. But stats are just one half of the equation. We have reactions and abilities to look at, and these will help round out the faction and turn it into something really deadly, at least in theory. So let's have a look. As per usual, we start with reactions, and their unique reaction is called Bay for Coward's Blood, and this can be used by everyone. The text reads, A fighter can make this reaction after a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of them makes a disengage action. Until the end of the battle round, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of melee attack actions made by friendly fighters that target that enemy fighter. This is, like most reactions, very, very solid, but very situational. Basically, if an enemy wants to move away from you, and you have some chaff in engagement range, you can burn their AP, react, and then the rest of your warband, regardless of range, gets a bonus to their attacks, but only when targeting that disengaging enemy. This has a lot of interesting cases. For example, an enemy disengaging a powerful, hard-to-shift enemy to deal with something else, or an enemy disengaging to attempt to do a runner. I'm sure you can think of plenty of instances where enemies leg it out of combat. Are all of these disengages worth the reaction? No, sometimes that +1 attack just isn't worth it. Other times, however, it really can be. This can even be combined with the likes of Onslaught and other CLAWS of Karanak abilities to get even more gains, which will spell doom for most targets. Again though, getting that burly is probably overkill unless the fleeing target is a serious threat. It's solid, but situational. Then we move on to our abilities, and first we have our first double, Blood for the Blood Guard, which can also be used by everyone. And the text reads, a fighter can only use this ability if an enemy fighter has been taken down by an attack action made by them this activation. This fighter makes a bonus move or a bonus attack action. This is a very standard ability that appears in all manner of factions. What makes this especially good in this faction, however, is how strong the faction is in combat. Your lowest strength is 4, and many of your units have decent damage and high volumes of attacks. Not only that, they are fast, with the minimum movement rocking up at 5. You can get your guys in, your units can land those kills, and then they can trigger this for even more damage, or a free move to get up the board, into another scrap, onto an objective. Heck, they could even just fall back. Very strong, and will likely be used often due to the raw damage and mobility boost it provides many of your faction's heaviest hitters. Following on from that, we have Flaming Breath, which is a double that is exclusively used by the Hound of Wrath, and the text reads, roll a dice for each visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter. On a roll of a 4+, allocate 3 damage points to the fighter being rolled for. This is a surprisingly solid ability that can be used for some light and limited crowd control, and frankly just to deal an extra 3 points of damage in a pinch to increase your damage per activation. The Hound of Wrath is the only thing that can use it, and with movement 7, this model is in a prime position to get use out of it. The biggest downside is the randomness of it all, since it hits on a 4+. The range is also really low, so it won't often be able to hit multiple enemies. Despite all of that, however, depending on who you're fighting, it might be more damaging on average than just using Onslaught. See, Onslaught gives you +1 attacks per attack action during an activation. As we've seen, the Hound of Wrath only has a minimum damage of 2 and strength 4. An extra attack against most enemies will actually deal less damage and still require a 4+ to hit. Even if you get both extra attacks, so you attack twice at the activation, you are, on average, only going to land one of those 2 hits, which gives Flaming Breath a fairly solid place to exist. If you are stationary and fighting one enemy, I would say Onslaught is the better choice. You are more likely to land a hit in general, and whilst that hit deals slightly less damage, you are still likely to do damage. If you only have one attack activation this turn because you've moved into combat, then Flaming Breath is probably better. Assuming average toughness targets, which is 4, you're looking at the same odds of landing a hit, and Flaming Breath will do more damage in most cases in that scenario. Now, things change one last time when it comes to high toughness enemies, say toughness 5 and above. Flaming Breath just becomes the better pick since the flat 3 damage on a 4+ is way better than 2 damage on a 5+. Like I said, a surprisingly solid ability that really helps round out the Hound of Wrath. Our final double is called Pack Hunters, and it is used by anyone with the Agile rune mark, so that's the Hound of Wrath and all variants of the Bloodwhelp. And it reads, pick a visible friendly fighter within 6 inches of this fighter that has both the Hounds of Karanak and Agile rune marks, and has not activated yet this battle round. You can activate this fighter immediately after this fighter's activation ends. This ability is very, very powerful. Straight up, this is probably the strongest double this faction has access to, and that's for 2 reasons. One, the effect is just straight up outstanding. It allows you to activate multiple units before your opponent can activate theirs. This opens up so many aggressive strategies and lets you really hammer certain areas of the board. You can even use it to fall back with multiple units. It's just a powerful effect with countless uses depending on the board state. The second part, and arguably the best part, is the rune marks. There are 5 units in the Hounds of Karanak that can use this ability. I'll say that again, there are 5 that can use this ability. You have 4 Bloodwhelps and 1 Hound of Wrath who can all trigger this. In theory, if you have the dice, you can activate one of your units, pop Pack Hunters on a double to activate a second, then at the end of their activation, pop it again to activate a third. I kid you not, if you have another double, you can do it again for a 4th. That's 4 back-to-back-to-back activations. Now, sure, the Bloodwhelps are not great in combat, and the Hound of Wrath has clear limitations, but the sheer horde of chaff you can throw around is very impressive and can be used to do all sorts of sneaky things on the battlefield. You won't want to burn this many dice to activate this on that many guys all at once all the time, but the fact that you can gives you a lot of options on the tabletop. This is very, very powerful. So that's all of the doubles out of the way. Let's look at our triples, starting with Horrifying Trophies. This can only be used by the Brutalizer with Shredder Blade and Meat Hook. So that's the Brutalizer with slightly worse stats, and honestly, this ability makes up for that immensely. And the text reads, a fighter can only use this ability if an enemy fighter has been taken down by an attack action made by them this activation. Until the end of the battle round, visible enemy fighters within 6 inches cannot use abilities. What an ability this is, and what a great way to start our triples. Utility is such a powerful tool in Warcry, and if you haven't realised yet, the CLAWS of Karanak have a surprising amount of utility for a blood god based faction. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. Being able to shut off enemy abilities in a fairly substantial area is ludicrously strong. Of course it's strong. Abilities make warbands. If they can't pull off their tricks, they are a huge disadvantage. Now the downside is that only the Brutalizer with Shredder Blade and Meat Hook can use this, so you won't have it on demand at all times, and in addition, that variation of Brutalizer has less attacks than the non-Meat Hook variant, making it slightly worse in terms of stats. And finally, the biggest restriction of this is that this only triggers on kill, which is hard to achieve with this model specifically. But if you can land that kill by weakening key enemies and then finishing them off with this guy, then you have an outstanding effect. It will take work to trigger, but that's a lovely way to balance out its oppressive nature, and it's well worth putting that work in. Onto our penultimate ability, we have our final triple, the Scent of Weakness, and this can only be used by the Pack Lord. And the text reads, a fighter can only use this ability if an enemy fighter has been taken down by an attack action made by them this activation. Until the end of the battle round, add 1 to the attack characteristics of melee attack actions made by visible friendly fighters while they are within 8 inches of this fighter. This is, to be blunt, another outstanding triple. This can only be used by the Pack Lord, but the Pack Lord is the strongest unit in your entire warband. Have you seen his stats? Attack 5, strength 5, 2-5 damage. This guy packs a punch and will cleave through a lot of enemies without much effort. If you set him up for the kill in advance, then you can reliably trigger this every single turn you have that triple. And triggering this is something you want to do often. +1 attack to allies within 8 is ridiculous. The range is huge, the effect is powerful, and naturally this can be combined with the likes of Onslaught or Bay of Cowards, which, if you are counting, can essentially give a model +3 attacks in the perfect scenario. And in that scenario, it's very possible to get the Hound of Wrath swinging in with 7 or 8 attacks per action, which is 14 to 16 if you're stationary, or 18 if you use Scent of Weakness and then Rampage, which is a very rare occurrence, to be fair. This ability is brilliant and really pushes the claws into this position of high volume attacks. It's brutal and it feels good every time you trigger it. This covers most of your weaknesses and really pushes your damage per attack through the roof. And finally, we now get to our quad, which is called Savage Mauling, and this can be used by everyone. It reads, pick an enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter that has a wounds characteristic of 20 or less. Remove that fighter from the battlefield and then set them up within 1 inch of this fighter. Then, this fighter makes a bonus attack action against that fighter. This is Rampage with a twist, which is a common trend in quads. Being able to manipulate enemy models is very, very strong. This lets you grab a dude and then plonk them anywhere else, providing they are still within 1 inch. How about moving a key target like a leader into a horde of your guys, allowing you to beat them to death with 0 chance of them escaping? If they try to escape, you have your reaction to then buff your entire army to kill that guy even easier later on. How about moving an enemy close to the ledge, attacking them, and then forcing a fall check? There's a lot of play here, and the manipulation aspect is very, very strong. The bonus attack action is also very strong. You'll want to use this ability instead of Rampage if you are already in combat. This lets you hit without having to move as a prerequisite. If you have to move to get into combat, then Rampage is the better ability, so use that instead. This gives you more combat options with your quad expenditure, and it's very, very good. Again, if you can combine this with Scent of Weakness, which is a rare occurrence, you will have a lot of fun with Savage Mauling. In conclusion, for the abilities, these are mostly outstanding. There are no bad abilities in this batch. They all have a place, and they all do something great. Whether that is cover a weakness of a unit, enhance their strength, or just buff your entire team. Heck, or just debuff the enemies, or allow for mass activation. The Claws of Karanak have a lot of power in their dice. The best part for me though, none of this is tied to RNG. Well, none if you ignore Flaming Breath. And even then, that's just as RNG dependent as punching a guy. So it doesn't really count. This means you are not tied to the fickleness of dice. You're not tied to dice value at all. Your stuff just works. This is offset by the higher than usual number of kill triggers, but that is a trade-off I very much enjoy. This makes the Claws of Karanak feel great. Their mechanics feed into their narrative, and this makes a wonderful harmony that I look for in any warband and their abilities. They feel very, very strong in that regard. But how do you put this all together? How do you take all this good value stuff and then make a list, well, I have two options for you, and that is a basic list that you can just make from the box and a list that requires an extra purchase to really enhance the overall flavour of the Claws of Karanak. So starting with the just directly from the box list, we have the pack lord. This is obvious, it's a must take, you can't not take him, he is the only leader in this faction, he must be here. Then we go on to our fighters, the Hound of Wrath for speed and brutality, 2 brutalizers, both with meat hooks. I prefer the hooks because they give more potential for that trophy coverage. The crit boost is also very nice, and the loss of attack hurts, but it's not really the end of the world when there's ways to buff them back up anyway. And then finally we have 4 blood whelps, all with chained flails. I prefer the flails, their damage does take a little bit of a hit, but that bonus attack really helps make up for that, and the added range makes them far harder to kill. Sure, they're a bit wet noodly, but I am a sucker for the range as always. This comes to 985 points, and there is more than enough wiggle room here to change the weapons of both of your brutalizers to the shredding blades if you prefer. And of course, you can mix and match spears however you want. I just like flails whenever I can take them. Okay, so basic list, this is how I would do it. Now, if you want to be a little bit creative and then make some changes, we have a bit of a mixed list here. So for this list, I decided that I wanted to have something with more meat, more damage, more strength, but also could keep up with the speed and the theme of the Claws of Karanak, and this means we're taking the Centaurian Marshal. He isn't cheap. He's not cheap. So you'll need to cut a lot of things to get him in the list. But I think this list could be quite fun. So again, we start with the Pack Lord as our leader, and then take 2 brutalizers, 3 blood whelps, and again these are meat hooks and chained flails, and then we take our ally, who is the Centaurian Marshal. So we had to cut the Hound of Wrath, and we had to cut a blood whelp, but we got the big guy in, and it comes to exactly 1000 points. So this guy is hellishly fast. He has a lot of wounds, toughness, attack, strength, and damage. Not only that, his abilities are rock solid. This guy's a net. I love nets. This guy has a net. This guy fits the theme of the hounds perfectly and can complement their strategies with the addition of more reliable, higher quality attacks. He's a great fit for this list. We did have to cut the Hound of Wrath and the Bloodwell, but I think the change here is definitely for the better, and it comes in at exactly 1000 points by my counting, which feels like Cornish Providence to me. And that's all we have for today. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. It means a lot. Please remember to leave a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel out an awful lot. If you noticed any mistakes or have some insights onto the Claws of Karanak, then please let me know in the comments below. These are a brand new faction. I tried to get as much experience with them as I could before writing this up, so mistakes could have been made. If there are mistakes, let me know. I'll make a pinned comment, and then bam, I'll put all those amendments in there, and of course credit the person who let me know. But with all of this out of the way, I hope you enjoy the Claws of Karanak as much as I have, and until next time, I'll catch you all later. Ta-ra.